on, everybody? It's Luke. We're here for our round one prize picks targets, and this week we've got the RBC Canadian Open. It's a event we haven't had for 2 years due to COVID regulations, and a golf course we haven't seen for over 10 years at this point, back in 2010. So in terms of data on the golf course, last time we saw it, there's a lot of unknown here, which means we do have to dive a little bit deeper this week into the golf course, some of the narratives this week to try and find an edge, but that's exactly what we've done. You know that I'm not shy to go out there, do my own research, all that sort of fun stuff. So what we're going to go over here is some of that research that I've done this week, as well as my top 5 props here for the first round. We'll be going over a 5-leg flex card that I'll be entering, as well as some of the other cards that I'll consider adding to my portfolio here for the first round. So buckle in, get ready, because we're going to get you prepared here for everything you need to know for Thursday. All right, so a different screen up, not Data Golf this time, because it's a brand new golf course. Anything on Data Golf is going to be reflective of what we saw in 2019, which was at Hamilton Country Club, a completely different setup. So let's just look hole by hole here. So first off, down here with the course statistics, this is a par 70. So even though it says par 71, keep in mind that one of these par 5s has been converted to a par 4. So there are 5 par 3s, 10 par 4s, and 3 par 5s on site. And the par 5 that was converted is going to be hole number 4 here. It's a 475-yard hole, making it a relatively difficult par 4 now that it's been converted. Something to note here is that all the par 3s are extremely long. You can see the minimum distance is 205 yards all the way up to 220 yards. And for the par 5s, because that 475-yard hole has been removed, the shortest of the par 5s is 540 yards, which is reachable for the entire field. Same thing with hole number 9, which is 544 yards, but it's no cupcake. You have to hit a drive in the fairway and then a solid hybrid or 3-wood, perhaps even something like a driver off the deck into the green. Par 4s are a little bit more spread out. Most of them are over 440 yards or under 400 yards. So in that 400 to 440 range, it's a little bit of a dead zone, which means a majority of your iron shots this week, particularly with the par 5s that have some distance, the par 3s that are over 200 yards, it's going to be a ton of long iron shots from 200 plus yards. And then you're going to have a lot of wedge shots because of some of those shorter 375-yard par 4, 372. Let's see, there's a few other ones on the docket that are closer to 400 yards as well, 397, that sort of thing. Those are going to be holes that you have wedge in your hand for sure. And some of the par 5s, of course, if you're laying up, it's going to be that same type of scenario. So either a wedge in hand or one of those long irons in hand on those par 5s. Either way, making this a little bit of a long iron fest. In terms of scoring average, I'd expect it to be pretty close to par because they do have the 3 par 5s. They're all gettable. You do have a few relatively straightforward par 4s, but with all of these super long par 3s, 208 yards, 220 yards, these 470-yard par 4s that we're going to have, of course, the one here that's converted, but there's already plenty on the golf course. 484, 486, 470 for the last 2 holes. Those are going to be absolute bears. So don't expect this place to be a birdie fest, but at the same time, it's not going to be overly impossible to go out there and make a score. Alrighty, now that we've got an idea of how this course will play, let's talk about our favorite props of the week, which for me, let's start with the birdie or better matchup prop, which is, of course, a matchup between 2 players in terms of how many birdies they make, which has been profitable for us. It's also been a little bit volatile. We've had really bad days when it's come to the birdie matchups, but also a lot of solid matchups. So I think we just have to be a little bit careful about the guys we're targeting against, because the times we've gotten ourselves into trouble has been when we've gone against a volatile player, i.e. a Davis Riley that comes to mind. Keegan Bradley, for example, guys that can go out there and make birdies in bunches. So it's not a surprise that my top prop on the board is going to be this Terrell Hatton prop down here against Danny Lee. And Danny Lee can be a little bit volatile, but in terms of pedigree, is going to be the lowest level player on the board here. And he's not somebody you can completely disrespect. I know a few weeks ago we took him in a single hole prop, and I kind of bashed the guy a little bit more than I should have. He, of course, ended up hitting the under there, kind of screwing us on that card. He's not an elite level player. He's not even really an average level player on tour. He's one of those replacement kind of just lower level guys that every once in a while will have a very solid round, but he's matched up against Trellhan, who, in terms of birdie or better production, is a top 25 player on tour. He's an extremely aggressive player, one of the better putters that we have on the PGA Tour. So as a result, he tends to make plenty of birdies, and a lot more than he should, because he's no stranger to making those 20 to 30 footers. So tomorrow we need Terrell's putter to cooperate, but against somebody like Danny Lee, I mean, 4-5 birdies is probably going to get the job done. And at a golf course, like I said, that's not all that gettable. I mean, you have plenty of holes that are going to be pars at best out there, those 480-yard par fours. That plays into Hatton's skill set, because if he can get onto those surfaces and make one of those 20 to 30 footer putts, he can steal a birdie that way and sway the match. So that's why I'm going with a lot of the elite putters when it comes to birdie production at this event. I'm particularly here for the first round with so much of it up in the air. I mean, we don't know a whole ton about this golf course. For round 2, we're going to have a lot more data to go off of, but at this point, elite putting is something I'm definitely hunkering down on. The second prop we have is Rory McIlroy. He's matched up against Adam Hadwin, and Hadwin, while he's been in a pretty solid stretch of form, he's more of a consistent player than he is a high birdie percentage player. And during this stretch of golf, he has had a higher birdie percentage, but if you look at his career numbers, it's much closer to PGA Tour average. The reason why he makes a bunch of birdies is because he keeps himself in position, never really gets himself out of the ball game, and kind of like a Trohan will make one of those long putts or chip in from time to time to give him those extra few strokes. So for Adam Hadwin, matching him up against Rory McIlroy, one of the elite birdie or better percentage players in PGA Tour history, an extremely aggressive player, and at a golf course like this, that's just over 7,000 yards. If Rory McIlroy has the elite driver working, is hitting a bunch of fairways this weekend, he's going to go out there and absolutely just take this place apart, because it'll be a wedge fest for him. Even those 480-yard holes, he's going to have like 140, 150 yards in, and we know that Rory McIlroy is capable of making birdies in bunches when that happens. Now, obviously, that's not all that likely to happen. It's more likely for him to have an average day off the tee, but even with those type of circumstances, you're talking about a top 10 player in the world being matched up with somebody who's a top 50 player in the world, but a not as aggressive version at that, right? I'm a little bit more worried about guys like HV3 against Scotty Scheffler. HV3 is a very aggressive player. Keith Mitchell, an extremely high birdie percentage player, so that's another scary matchup. Sahith Theegala against Matthew Fitzpatrick, who I love Matt Fitzpatrick. In fact, you can see he's one of the picks we're going to talk about here in a second. But Sahith Theegala is a scary matchup to go against. So obviously, the more and more experience we get with this category, the better we're going to get at betting it, and just trying to avoid some of those potential landmines is something that I think you guys should incorporate into your cards. And just a few others, Carlos Ortiz, he can get on a roll in a hurry, so I would probably avoid that prop. Sebastian Munoz, probably avoid. He's also a streaky player. And even Jonathan Vegas down here. Just, I think a lot of the matchups they have on the board have a lot of these volatile players for that exact reason, because if you take 5 of them in the same card and all of them have that volatile matchup against them, I mean, you got to think, right? They're volatile, so they have like a 15 to maybe 20% chance of hitting that ceiling. That's why they're quote-unquote volatile. They hit that ceiling more than other players. If you take 5 props, right, you're going to have a relatively high percentage chance of hitting one of those quote-unquote landmines, if not multiple of them, which I've had to happen on a few of my cards. So just from personal experience, be a little bit careful when you're targeting props here with the birdie or better matchups. Next thing we're going to go to is strokes. We're going to take Shane Lowry under 68.5. And the reason why I'm confident to go to Shane here, not really anybody else when it comes to strokes, is because he has the around the green play that we're looking for. He's gaining across all 4 major stat categories. He's an extremely consistent player. And over the last 3 months on tour, it's been Scotty Scheffler number 1 in terms of shots gained total, and then number 2, Shane Lowry. That's how consistent that he's been. Hasn't missed a cut over that stretch. It's just been absolutely rock solid. And for him to get to 68, that's just 2 under on this par 70 setup, is more than realistic for the big guy from Ireland. So I like him there at 68.5. I have him projected for closer to 67.6 strokes, which is almost an entire stroke less than his projection. And because it's there at 68.5, not 68 like a lot of these other top tier guys, he doesn't have to shoot 3 under par to hit. I think 2 under par would be more than reasonable from Shane. Something like 3 to 4 under par might be a ceiling performance, based on how difficult I think the course is going to play. But we don't need that from Shane. We just need a slightly above average performance, which I think is more than reasonable from the big guy. And just talking about some of these stud options, I don't hate going to JT, Roy McIlroy, even Scotty Scheffler there at 68. They're guys I considered adding to my card, but there's just a lot of push potential there. If they were at 68.5, I would like them even more than a Shane Lowry, because in terms of their projection, I have them there at like 67.4, which is lower than the numbers that they're projected at. But you have to think, is a push all that worth going after? And for me, at least on the card that I'm entering here, it's not going to be. But if you're going to take any other stroke props on the board, I don't hate going to any of the 4 guys at 68 strokes. Just understand that there's a lot of push equity there. Next up, let's go to birdies or better. And that's where we're going to have our next prop, which is Matt Fitzpatrick. I told you guys we'd be getting to him here at some point. He's one of the few guys on the board at 3.5 birdies. In fact, at this point, he's the only guy on the board at 3.5 birdies. I believe they had Patrick Reed up at one point, but he ended up withdrawing from the event. He was also at 3.5 birdies. So that leaves us with Matt Fitzpatrick, who, of course, is a good course fit here. He's a well-rounded player. Really accurate off the tee, very solid around the green, and the putter, it can be a little bit streaky, but he tends to have a little bit of a reputation for having that short game, because when he's on his best stuff, he makes putts in bunches, right? So for him to be at the bottom of the board, I think he should be projected for closer to 4 birdies, because in my personal projections, I have him for 4.5, right? So at 3.5, that of course gives him a huge potential just to hit the over there. He could very well make 5 or 6 birdies on the day. That is well within his range of outcomes. The real kicker here is that everyone else is at 4. And for them to hit, they have to get to 5 birdies, which, considering there's only 3 par 5s on the golf course, only 2 quote-unquote short par 4s that are less than 400 yards. I mean, that's 5 easy birdie opportunities right there. Realistically, you're going to see guys make like 2 or 3 of those, right? And for them to get to 5 birdies, they're going to have to make 1 or 2 real tough birdies throughout their round. Whereas somebody like Matt Fitzpatrick is just going to have to find a way to make 1 or 2 of them, which is a lot more realistic in my book. And he's somebody kind of like a Terrell Hatton who can make those 20 to 30 foot putts. He's got the ability to make those putts from range. He's also a relatively consistent player. Isn't going to get him in all that much trouble. So I like him there at that type of number. And even if he makes a few bogeys, let's say he's a little bit sloppy with the putting, which is really the one thing that can hold him back from time to time. Like I said, he's a little bit streaky. That's why we're taking birdies or better. That's why we're not over here on strokes where he's at 68.5. Just feels a little bit safer for me going on the birdie route. And lastly, the last guy we're getting to is going to be Tony Finau in terms of greens in regulation. And these greens are going to be hard to hit. But the price for Tony Finau is just mispriced. He should be somebody who's closer to 12.5 or even 13, where a lot of the other players were yesterday. He's an elite level iron player, and over his last 12 events, hasn't lost on approach. In fact, off the tee has been a gainer in all of those events. The issue has been the short game, where he has been bleeding strokes to the field. He has made a ton of cuts in a row at this point, and his swing is dialed in. That is not what's holding Tony Finau back. So for me, in greens, he has a ton of push equity here at 12. I have him projected for 13.2 greens, and that's despite these being tiny targets. They're just 4,000 square foot per green on average, making them among the smallest that we have on tour. The X factor for somebody like Tony Finau is his distance. Because he's so long off the tee and these fairways should be relatively receptive, he's going to have wedge into plenty of these holes. So even though they are only 4,000 square foot, if he's going to have a ton of wedges, I'm very comfortable with him still getting to 13, maybe even 14 greens. Whereas some of the shorter hitters, perhaps like a Terrell Hatton, perhaps, let's see, no one else on this board at least is a relatively short hitter, might have a little bit more trouble out of the rough if they're not driving it well. So I'd rather go to the guys that are both solid off the tee and on approach, and Tony Finau checks that box emphatically. That's all I've got for the round 1 preview. I will say that I am adding some extra 3 and 4 leg cards there, some round robins with most of the props towards the end. I am kind of avoiding the matchup props with my extra exposure because they can be a little bit open to variance, but going to have those last 3, the birdie or better props, strokes, and same thing with the JAR, and a ton of those extra cards, and some of them with the Taco Tuesday props from today. So make sure you hop on that sort of stuff as well. And before you hop on out of here, go ahead and let me know what your favorite prop on the board is. Comment that down below. Also, go ahead and let me know why. If you haven't already hit that like button, Also, make sure you go ahead and do that. And if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, I would highly recommend you do so you don't miss any of the content to come. We're going to have previews for rounds 2 through 4. Also going to have content for the rest of the PGA Tour schedule, so you're not going to want to miss any of that when it drops. So best of luck here for your round 1 slips, everyone, and let's get this cash.